verse 5. Excuse me. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. Aaron should have stopped right there. Aaron was a priest in the house. He was a priest. He was called by God. Moses is up receiving the 10 Commandments. He's up in the presence of God, and Aaron should have known better. So Aaron builds an altar before it, and this is where it gets really interesting. I didn't know this. Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." Now he's made a golden calf, and it's the God that they're serving. And then he calls it the Lord. He called this thing Elohim. He called this thing Yahweh. He called this thing the same name as God of heaven. Ooh. Yeah. He broke the first commandment real good. And the third and the second, and it just really just jabbed it in there, right? Now you know why God was burning. And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Now I want to show you something. You think, wow, what does this have to do with leaving? They never left Egypt. They got out of their bondage and then they went back to it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It was, they actually made a golden calf of their bondage, is really what they did. They made a golden calf of the past. Do you know you can do that? So think of it this way. Well, what does that mean for me? Here's what it means. They were victims. Remember, they were slaves for what, 400 years?
Mm-hmm.
They were slaves under the Egyptians. So they were victims, and because they only knew their victimization, they got out and they were free of their bondage, and they're in the desert, and then they made a golden calf, their own god, to their victimization. Am I explaining that right? We sometimes get so stuck to our past that we make a golden calf to our wounds.
That's right.
We make a golden calf to our past. And we don't let nobody touch it. We don't let anybody correct us on it. We don't let anybody heal it, because we worship our victimization. The truth is, we are just like the Israelites. We have lived through our bondage. We're over here and we're living from over there. You can't do that. So again, here's another type of the memorial being a weight on their ankle. They've drug it with them. They're not really free.
That's right.
They just brought their bondage with them. And here they are in their bondage. What are you doing? God set them free, but they weren't free here. You guys, we can live in a free country all we want on the surface. We can come to church and say, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom and liberty. But if you're not free here, then you're just like the Israelites, still stuck to your bondage. And if you're not careful, you can make your past and your bondage your golden calf that you worship. Because you'll refuse to heal. You refuse to let God touch those things and those areas and those places deep inside your soul, so He can give you a future. The whole point is this: He wants to move you forward.
Amen.
His whole goal for Israel in Ezra, in Exodus, was to move them forward. He had no intention of them staying back. Now, even the people in Ezra could have acted like victims. They'd been taken. They'd been captured. They'd been taken into captivity. We have to be careful that we don't idolize our past so much we cannot have a future. Memorials are great where they're placed. Even when we bury someone, and it's difficult, it's so difficult to go home and know that they're not with us. The memories go with us, but we don't take the tombstone with us. And if we did, it would be a little weird. Okay? But we have to be careful that even spiritually we don't do that. Because listen, they want you to move on. They want you to have a life. I remember, I know my mother-in-law talked to me before she passed away. We spent 4 hours with each other the week before she did. She didn't want me to sit and grieve and do nothing and mourn her. She wanted us to have a life. Amen. In fact, she talked about my kids. She talked to me about Marlena and Ben and the things that they were going to do. And she wasn't going to be here, but she still wanted them to do it. She didn't want them to stand at the grave site and die with her. She wanted them to have a life. God wanted Israel to move out of their bondage, but they couldn't get Egypt out of their heart.
That's good.
It's okay to have a memory, but don't let the memory be your God.
Amen.
We have to be careful of that. In Genesis 19, you know the story, it's a famous one. Lot and his family are told to get out of Sodom and Gomorrah. And God gives them a specific directive to not look back. And the reason why he tells them not to look back is because he was trying to get them to separate themselves from the sin of the past. But Lot's wife couldn't do that. And in verse 26, but Lot's wife is walking behind him and she looks back. And she becomes a pillar of salt. Because she not only disobeyed God, but here's the issue. She could not let go of her sin. What is your past? Is it a memory? Sometimes our past, like I said, there's a grieving there. I understand that. God understands that. But we grieve not like those with no hope. Is your past your victimization and your hurt and your wounds and you can't let them heal? And that's your God. Is your past a past sin and you keep going back to it? Like Lot's wife, who looks back. And so what happens is you never actually move forward from the sin because you can't get your eyes off of it.